Hey, MSP community, it's Brian Doyle, and I hope you are all doing well. I know it's been a couple weeks since our last release. Things have been super busy in my day job over at VCIO Toolbox, but today I'm going to bring you one of our coaching sessions that we did just a couple Tuesdays ago. Each week we do open coaching over at VCIO Toolbox, really talking about how to build a governance as a service program and take it to market. Thought this might be helpful for you listeners, and join us again next week when we return back to some great guests that are going to be joining us over the course of the next month or two. So thank you so much for always being listening. We love all your comments and hope to see you again soon.
Today, we're going to kind of focus on what I call governance as a service. And really what we're talking about is stepping on the gas, no pun intended, to generate some new MRR and how we can approach that. For those that are not familiar with kind of governance, risk, and compliance as a whole, there's the trend, all of you have been hearing about it, towards, regulations like CMMC and other regulatory concerns like HIPAA and ISO that clients might need to adhere to. But as you've heard me talk about over the past few weeks too, building a cyber program, while certainly can be tied to regulatory requirements, needs to be tied, are things that we want to do too to improve our cyber insurability, make sure our claims get paid, and quite frankly, just build a culture of cybersecurity in our business where people feel empowered to share when they make a mistake so we can make sure that we're containing any outcomes a little bit easier as well. And to do all of this, governance to me is kind of the driving force. MSPs are really good at building technology stacks and deploying those into the system. But as I've shared over the past few weeks, that is one portion of an overall cybersecurity story, right? Those tools are great for doing the technical blocking and tackling that's needed within the environment, but they don't have any control over the humans that are necessarily pushing the keyboards. And they also don't control, are we maintaining things and keeping things current and up to date? Many of you that have done demos with me, I joke about it oftentimes during a demo that I'm now, 5 years plus removed from being an MSP, and that's a lifetime. Our industry moves in cycles, and those cycles are quick, right? And when I was leaving, technology, ransomware was just coming on the scene. Now we've gone through that being an enormous problem to something that we can contain, manage, and eradicate relatively easily with the right tooling and the right processes in place. And governance really speaks to that process story. Do we have the oversight? Do we have the right controls in place? Do we have the right procedures in place to manage, our environments and make sure when changes are made, we can act adequately and make those changes as well. And for things that we do implement, make sure that they're being reviewed on a regular standpoint and not becoming stale, that the process doesn't have holes that we implemented that was absolutely bulletproof when we did it, but technology has changed. And the tooling has changed such that those things have become antiquated. Just look at things like endpoint protection and how much they've morphed over the last 10 years, and what their capabilities are for the end user as well. And that's a great example of where, governance and really looking at things comes into play. Over here at VCIO Toolbox, we're going through our initial SOC 2 audit process right now. And this is really giving us an opportunity to look at our controls as well and see, where we may have gaps that we want to tighten up as we go through this process. But more importantly, it's getting us in the habit of, an annual review on everything we do. And that's, really exciting for us here. But more importantly, speaks more to this whole governance process, because how can you shrink that burden for your customer over time? Well, acting as the oversight and making sure that they're taking steps based on your knowledge of the industry really can help with that process. So to kick things off, why governance as a service as a whole, or why should we care about the governance layer of that triad of governance, risk, and then compliance? Well, regulatory agents are really looking at governance. If you look at some of the more recent updates to things like CIS and NIST CSF, they focused almost entirely on governance, right? The NIST CSF 2.0 brought in that whole governance layer, really started looking at, hey, great, we've got the controls so you can identify, detect, and so forth. But do you have something that's overseeing this whole process? Do you have, people in process in place to make sure that those things are actually occurring? And that became a big part there. CIS, to a lesser extent with version 8.1, reclassified some of their controls so they were tied more to the governance process. Not as big a lift as the CSF did, but you're starting to see that become a bigger layer across the board. For those of you that are tracking some of the near-term updates coming on, HIPAA is going through its first big overhaul, I think, since 2014, which is scary when you think about that. But a big portion of the HIPAA overhaul is going to be a whole slew of new governance focused questions. And these are things that a lot of times customers struggle with because you only know what you know, right? And they don't have the understanding or the acumen to even understand what good governance might look like as it relates to, maintaining they're maintaining their compliance against a series of, technical based controls, but more importantly, need guidance into building their own governance plan to really help them manage the process long term. So, with regulatory agents looking more at governance and some of those framework updates that are occurring right now, this is becoming, a great opportunity for MSPs to showcase their expertise. We did our session last week for those of you that joined me there about, some of the things that are causing 4 out of 10 insurance claims to be either outright rejected or at least have a large scale carve out. And a lot of this is because people are just not paying attention to the wheel. Things like policies, a lot of companies, they put policies into their HR manuals 10 years ago and have never reviewed or updated that once. And those things cyber insurers are looking for when a claim comes, because if you don't have modern policies in place that are addressing today's technology requirements, those are things that can disqualify you from a payment as well. And again, though I've said it a couple times in my opening here, customers really don't have the resources to support that governance. It's not that they don't have the resources. Obviously, you're going to need to pull their team in to be a partner with you during this process, but they don't have the education or understanding because they're traditional business people, right? They're people that have their own day jobs already, and they don't really have the time to really expand the breadth and understand the governance at a much higher level that you do just by proxy of doing the jobs you do every day. So when you start thinking about how to roll out a governance as a service program, you really got to think of what are the elements that come into that. Your tech stack is the driver that gives you the information and evidence that'll support a governance process. And it certainly puts up the security barriers and builds the automation to potentially protect you before, an incident can strike. But it doesn't do a lot of the wraparound services. And when you look here, you'll see, 9 core services that you need to think about. Policy and framework development is a great example. A few moments ago, I talked about those aging policies that no longer address today's modern needs. And, if you look at most compliance programs, they require an annual policy review and updates, or at least attestation that things haven't changed and that policy has been reviewed and will continue on as it is. And that's where you can really come in and help develop some of that process, policy, and framework development within the organization. We've talked oftentimes in these coaching sessions about risk management, but risk is really looking at the impacts, likelihoods, and probabilities of these threats that face a company actually occurring. And that's absolutely a governance step. It's looking at those risks, building a risk priority matrix in VCIO Toolbox. Those of you that are familiar with the tools, that's that heat map and risk register that we do where we're really looking at those impacts and likelihoods and making sure that we're communicating to the client what needs to be addressed first. Well, all that risk is part of a governance process. Your client probably has risk management on the finance side, and this is the equivalent side of making sure they have IT operational risk, that they're not going to go down for an extended period of time, and that the right controls are in place there, and that those controls are actually occurring when they're supposed to. Compliance monitoring is another one, and that's really looking at your controls. Again, I mentioned we're going through our SOC 2 period right now. And when you look at compliance monitoring, it's really making sure that evidence isn't becoming dated against your control, that the controls that you assessed earlier in the year are still tried and true today, that things haven't changed and your control or your answer hasn't caused a weakness against those controls when you're doing compliance monitoring. But it's really making sure that things that you're not looking at this as a once a year point in time process. And in governance, you're making sure periodically throughout the year, maybe on a quarterly basis, that things are still the same, that conditions haven't changed that might weaken what we had as evidence or as a control against our compliance safeguard, earlier in the year. Audit, access control and identity management is another key thing here. One of the biggest things that happens with users, and we all know this as customers or as MSPs that inherit customers, there is very little account review and organizational group review going on within your clients. If the customer doesn't have a defined technology exit policy and they're not sharing with you when end users are getting terminated, you might have a lot of open and accessible accounts when you inherit a client, or if a client's not sharing that information with you. If they're not implementing MFA and they're still fighting that battle here in 2025, you don't really know if the true identity of the person logging in is who that's supposed to be, right? And all of this has an oversight methodology that the customer is not doing. Again, I go back to, when I inherited a lot of our clients when I was an MSP, first thing we would do is go into Active Directory and just see what was out there. We would export that list of users and go, who doesn't work here anymore, right? And then go one step further. If you're a little bit more mid-size, or if you're supporting mid-size to larger size companies, how about when people get promoted or switch departments? In my history, I worked big corporate and I was at a Fortune 60 healthcare concern. And if you got a promotion or got moved to another job, part of that was taking away any of your application access or data access that you had in your previous role and ensuring you only had access to what you needed moving forward. And that's one of those things that, doesn't generally occur in small to mid-sized business, but you can absolutely develop into a governance as a service program that you provide. Data governance is also just an understanding of where that data lives within your system. Those of you that are working with your customers to prepare for CMMC right now, one of the first things you've got identified is what is unclassified information and where does that live in the system, and what are the data flows between different, hardware, systems or database systems that data may travel. And if you don't have a good handle on that, you can have a data leak, totally unintentional, occur. And again, building those mappings, looking at those flows, assessing what's coming into those systems are not something traditionally customers are really good at doing at. And again, you can work with them to potentially do that and then bring in technological solutions that can help maintain that long term. I know Cavello, as an example, is looking at data classification as part of their tooling, and that really helps, manage some of this data governance where you can get the information that you can then oversee and report back to your clients and ask questions on. Obviously, for those that are being compliance bound, audit and reporting is a big part of it. And when you're doing governance as a service, you're really reducing the audit workload. As we're preparing for our audit, one of the things that we've been doing over the course of the last 18 months was really looking at our systems and going, what do we have here? What do we need to maintain? We've been tracking ourselves against for a variety of frameworks for the last year, looking at quarterly intervals, making sure things don't change so our evidence is up to date and we can really fly through that audit period a little bit faster. So the more you can, maintain things and keep things from getting stale, evidence getting stale, policies getting stale, those things can really reduce the amount of time a customer needs in the audit, and you're also helping them reduce some of their audit costs in the process as well. Stakeholder engagement's another one. I say this all the time to customers that I'm working with. When you engage with a client, if you're pigeonholed with that single point of contact, besides that being a huge threat to your relationship with the client, it's also doing your client a disservice, because that single point of contact no matter how in tune they are with the overall enterprise, doesn't understand how all the technology and services are being used at every department, at every user level, right? So I worked for a CEO once upon a time that used to do the sign of the cross, not looking to bring religion here, but just using it as an example. And he used to say you need to know three people up, three people down, and three people on each side that are peers of your point of contact. In doing that, you're really going to understand how an organization operates and not miss any opportunities that can come back to your MSP. Well, obviously, some of our organizations might not be that large that there's, 10 people surrounding this. But think about your small to mid-sized customers you might serve. There are absolutely department heads, people that are running the shop floor, people that actually understand how users are interacting with data, systems, and their voice is usually not being heard at any point in the in the business review process, certainly in the procurement process, and at any step along the way. And if you can get more engaged with those stakeholders and get that feedback, you're going to understand where gaps might be in a cybersecurity program that can cause issues down the line, not meeting compliance requirements, loss of contracts associated with that, and again, those cyber insurance claims not being paid. So you got to start really looking at how you can increase stakeholder engagement, maybe build a security committee inside your customer, and you act as that security lead there. Other things that need to be considered here is training and awareness. So you sold the customer no before, or breach secure now, or fin security, or something on that order. Are you watching what's happening with it? Is anybody actually looking to see who's passing those trainings? And if they're not passing those trainings, helping get them the education they need so they can pass it. Is anybody really looking at those phishing reports? And when you catch somebody that did click on that phishing, how are you interacting with them? Are you going over there and beating them up and really making them feel bad about that? Or are you giving them guidance so they don't do it again, but also an education so they know if they do it to come to somebody and let them know they may have clicked on something, so that problem can be contained early and before it becomes a much larger problem. All of that has a governance layer there where somebody needs to be looking at those reports and making sure, A, that people are doing what they're supposed to do with their security and awareness training and those emails, or access is not going into a black hole, but also taking that one step further and then working on an educational plan so you can help people become better at that, not ignore those emails, and build and foster that culture of cybersecurity. And then finally, there's always room for continuous improvement. As you work this cycle here, there's going to be things that need to be tweaked, whether that's annually, biannually, or over time. And you want to continuously look at where you can improve your security program overall. And it requires a governance layer to do that. So hopefully this really gives you at a very top level, a good sense of what can be included in the governance as a service program. And, when I transition from there into what should an MSP provide in terms of governance, I'm going to take these 6 core pillars you see here: policy management, risk assessment, compliance monitoring, access control, data quality inspection, and reporting, and share that the MSP should really be involved in overseeing all of those. And VCIO Toolbox, more specifically the Cybranch GRC product, can directly support you in doing a lot of that work. Obviously, when it comes to access control and data quality inspection, we can absolutely take in the evidence that supports it, but we don't have tools or integrations yet that feed that information directly into the system. But certainly when you look over at the left-hand side, we've got the ability to help our customers curate and build their policies. At a bare minimum, we can inventory their policies and make sure they're set up for annual review and be able to track those reviews in our system. We've got the ability to do the risk assessment. So when we go beyond just our framework findings, we can actually bring in other risks that are going to go in there and really serve as that risk management resource, helping them see the big picture. Compliance monitoring, we have active dates. There is many of you may not be aware, but inside your reporting, you will see a compliance report in there where you can actually see the last time any framework control was reviewed, and make sure that there is no aging review control or controls, and make sure that things aren't falling out of compliance. That's going to become a much more automated process as we move through 2025 and add our workflow and an alerting engine into it as well. And then, of course, we have the ability to bring out the reporting where you can show where we are against policies, where you can show the evidence and bring the framework and take that to a client security team or committee team and let them really know where those gaps are. So we're really trying to enable, here at VCIO Toolbox, and more specifically with the Cybranch platform, all the tools you need to build a solid governance program. And then where we still have gaps, you can bring that evidence in to support it. And that all goes into that very structured document manager we've released as well. So again, this wasn't meant to be a commercial. If there's anybody new here that's a prospect on the call, please don't take it as such. But really what I'm saying is these are not wheels that you have to create if you're using our system. The core pillars are already built into the system, and we're really looking at enabling our MSP partners and our MSSP partners to generate more revenue in a way that also brings them closer and stickier to their clients throughout the relationship. Now, it's not just the client that needs to be looked at in a governance as a service program. We also need to look at vendors and suppliers, right? You've all been on the receiving end of a due diligence questionnaire. You know those things can be time consuming. You know that oftentimes when you do that, there's no true proof of that what you're doing being passed back to the requesting vendor. We have built a process in our system and through our third-party risk management tool where you can take on that responsibility for a customer. And again, that just becomes another service with recurring revenue opportunity that you can build into your portfolio and take over that responsibility of assessing vendors and suppliers. We have pre-built vendor risk assessments in our system. You can use traditional frameworks, and you can send those questionnaires out to a customer or a vendor or supplier, and they can then respond just like you do to many of those spreadsheet related ones I'm sure you've received. When you do that, that's going to create a vendor scorecard that you can share with your customer and really help them see where vendors stand and whether or not they want to continue doing business with that vendor or introduce that vendor into their environment. Similar to the way you can build a plan of action or a roadmap for yourself inside a VCIO Toolbox for the customer, you can create remediation plans for your vendors as well. You can send them the tasks that they need to do to become a vendor, the gaps that you want to hear how they're going to address, and build remediation plans with timelines and owners at the vendor side. So when those timelines pass, if they haven't taken those remediation steps, you can circle back as that governance specialist and have those conversations, understanding why they missed their schedule and what they're doing to retain your business or retain that contract. So we can track all that vendor remediation and really stay on top of these vendors in a way more than likely that our customers would not do on their own. So, those are some of the steps that are some of the things that are available to you. What are some of the customers' benefits by taking you on as their governance partner? Well, first, it's going to reduce their overhead, right? Depending on the size and scope of that client, they may have to bring in their own governance specialist or take internal resources and leverage them harder than they are today. So we really want to make sure that we're coming in and really helping them structure this. We're still going to understand this. You can't do governance without their buy-in. You can't do governance and oversight without them being a participant in it. So you're still going to need to bring some internal resources in to be the customer conduit to getting things resolved. But certainly we can free them up so they don't have to take on this responsibility themselves, educate themselves to what is required, and then really create what could be another full-time job for their organization. The other thing we're going to do is improve efficiency. I've already talked about it. Almost every single person I see on this call, I know has a very well-defined security stack. And that security stack has the tools that you need to help your customer achieve good cybersecurity, a strong security posture, and achieve compliance where it's required. But now by you bringing those tools, understanding how they use from your stack and getting those reports back, you can really streamline that governance process by showing the evidence that's required, helping them organize that, and showing them where that ties back to the policies you're creating so they can show and prove that they're keeping things up to a modern state. This kind of goes hand in hand with it, but ensuring compliance, obviously if you're building a governance as a service program, because it becomes a living, breathing program, you're not going to just be looking at an audit event as an annual monster that the customer might take on. By putting the governance layer in, we should be doing updates throughout the year, iterating on that original assessment that you did. And then that becomes very easy to pass to an auditor because it really becomes a living, breathing document with up-to-date information that's maintained throughout the year. And then as those policies become updated, you can bring those in and show your auditors, hey, look, we take policy development seriously here. And we looked at some of our policies that were aging out, and these are the updates that we made. This will, again, streamline that compliance process, help you get through the audit process much quicker. I noticed when we ran our data centers back before, I started VCIO Toolbox, that the more we iterated our assessments and maintained our evidence throughout the year, the faster we can get the auditors out of our business. And we were cutting our audit bills in many cases by as much as 50%. Finally, it gives increased visibility into the big picture. Again, everything that I talked about today are things that customers are generally not looking at when left to their own devices. You're going to have a good understanding of what users are weak in their training, what accounts might be aged out and open and a vulnerability point for a customer. Just by looking at the big picture, you can help them take the steps to reduce their attack surface very easily and give them the confidence that they've got the right partner at the helm, right? And reinforce their trust in you and ensure you don't fall into the commodity bucket as a service provider. So those are some of the customer benefits that can be provided through a governance as a service process. And of course, for you, it's the MRR. Don't make this a flat fee, or make this a flat fee, excuse me, not an hourly thing. I have seen people build governance plans where they're trying to associate hours and all that. Look at what your pool of hours might be over the course of the year to do all these activities. Integrate your, I would, if you're doing a separate security stack and a separate governance stack, bring those things under one umbrella and call it a cybersecurity program, and really look at, things like tool costs, reporting costs. And if you have to bring any external services in, like penetration testing or other things that need to be done by third parties to maintain a security plan, and build that under one governance wrapper so you take control of everything and don't have all those separate agreements for all the different things you're doing for a customer from a security perspective, and giving them that a la carte menu where they can choose this but say no to that and so forth. So again, guys, that's hopefully a very high level view of some ways that you could take the governance process, integrate yourself into the customer's business for a much stronger hold, both for you as the MSP wanting to retain a customer, but your customer also having somebody that can help them truly move the needle forward in making sure that their program is bulletproof, that they're going to increase their probability of their claims getting paid, and certainly if they need to adhere to any compliance requirements, that they're consistently on a track to do so easier, faster, and in a much more streamlined fashion. So with that, folks, I open up the floor for any Q&A. For those of you that are new to the coaching session today or coming back, Sharon, I see you out there. Welcome. We're happy to, answer any questions you might have on any topic today. For those of you that it is your first time coming in, I will let you know that I'll let you know, or that we do this coaching every Tuesday at 3 p.m. and go a little bit further. Mark, I'm going to reach out to you directly. There are some things going on with Breach Secure Down. We're still tracking there. I see your question about that, but there are a couple hurdles we've hit. I'll reach to you one-on-one, and we'll set up a meeting for this week that we can talk about on that, because you may be able to help us where we're not getting support as well. I hate to push back that way, but I know that's something both you and I are eager to get done as well. But we have run into a couple roadblocks on that one. But again, guys, if you're new to the coaching, we do this every Tuesday at 3 p.m., runs about a half hour. And certainly if you have any topics that you'd love us to cover, we'd love to hear them. All of our previous trainings can be found in the university underneath office hours there. I think we're getting close to over 100 different coaching sessions now having been recorded. So certainly we've covered most of the major topics out there. If you've got something that you want us to cover and really become in tune with, just let us know. And we're happy to do that with you as well. So with that said, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. Mark, I will follow up with you, and I will give you guys back the rest of your day. But thank you so much for joining me today.